Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, and welcome back to another live stream review. It's been quite a while since we've done one of these. I think our last one was Doctor Strange. You may notice an absence of Tate. I was going to talk about this at the end. I'll talk about it now. He has moved to Austria to do a skiing instructing course. So me and George are manning the fort all this month. We'll be doing Harry Potter month. We've reviewed the first 5 Harry Potter movies so far on our channel. In the upcoming weeks, we'll be reviewing the rest of them. But we are not here to talk about Harry Potter as such today. We are here to do our review on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which is the spin-off movie directed by David Yates, written by J.K. Rowling, starring Eddie Redmayne, which is the spin-off to the Harry Potter franchise, all about Newt Scamander going about catching his magical creatures. So we've spoken a little bit about this, sort of our opinions on this, very different opinions on this movie. So I actually think this might be one of our most interesting reviews we've ever done on the channel, certainly in the same line as Star Wars The Force Awakens from last year. That comes to mind. Anyway, so although we've talked about the Harry Potter's length and all the other ones, other reviews are about an hour each, sort of go over what we thought of Harry Potter. I love the Harry Potter films. I am a casual fan. I like my Lord of the Rings and my Star Wars and things like that a lot more, but I do appreciate the Harry Potter movies. George, you're the Harry Potter master fan. I mean, I can see behind you right there on your display on your shelf all the Harry Potter books.
Yeah, and it's a weird one because we've spoke about it in each one, and it's just one of those where it's been great that it's come back. And it's interesting because I was thinking every single time we've reviewed, I've been trying to say in the books less and less. And finally, we have a film where there is no in the book. The only thing I can say is in the screenplay, which I haven't read yet. It's right here, though. It's ready to get read, but I haven't.
Well, actually, it was a book, though. J.K. Rowling
that's a good point.
As a book, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the part of the comic relief. There's Quidditch Through the Ages, Fantastic Beasts, Where to Find Them. And it's kind of it's a school textbook. It's basically an encyclopedia, but of creatures. So it's very hard to say you've read it when there's no story to it.
Exactly, yeah. And I remember saying to you the day I was going to see it, because we both saw this on opening day on Friday. Personal reasons, we've had to push it back to the weekend. But I was going to actually read the book. It's a very, very small book. It's almost like a pamphlet. And you said, Chris, there's really no point. It just talks about the creatures. It is like a textbook, as you just said. There's no real story to it. J.K. Rowling has taken the premise and she's crafted what was going to be a trilogy. Now, as it turns out, it's going to be a 5-movie series, all about the lore of Harry Potter, not just Fantastic Beasts. So she's really sort of broadened it up a bit. And actually, if I'm thinking of other films like this that come to mind, I think the one I've compared it to the most is Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy. Sort of taking that other concept, almost like a spin-off to the main series, and extending it out for quite a lot than probably what it should be. But I think with the case of this, unlike the other one, and actually one of the positives I'll give this film is that it's not so tethered to Harry Potter. Like, you can watch this on its own and it's its own thing. It doesn't beat you over the head with references. There are a few references in it, but we'll go into those in the spoiler section. We'll start off with spoiler free. But I did appreciate that about this movie, that it is its own entity and it stays that way all the way through the film.
Yeah, and I think with JK, with The Hobbit, you've got a pre-existing book, which they had to do, which was stretched over because it was so short, the Hobbit book. Whereas with this, at least there's the knowledge that she's writing it herself. It's her story still. And it's the first time we don't know what's going to happen. We know 1 or 2 minor things that have to happen towards the end of the series, but we don't know A, B, C, D, E, F, G, exactly like the Hobbit had to follow. So it gives them a lot of freedom, but the comparisons are there because it's a different era in the same universe with some minor connections.
Yeah, and it's good that we talked about this with our Harry Potter reviews, how closely JK has worked with all the directors and the producers and everything like that. She wants to make sure that her franchise, her world that she's created, is in good hands, and she's absolutely done this with this one, with stepping up, writing the screenplay for it, and being, I don't know how close she worked with the director and the producers on this one, but she has had a massive input into this one, probably more so than all of the other Harry Potter movies that have come before it. So the plot to this one is the adventures of writer Newt Scamander in New York's secret community of witches and wizards, 70 years before Harry Potter reads his book in school. That's the plot on IMDb. Really, that is not what the plot is. So I don't know who has written that. You've just got Eddie Redmayne in 1920s New York, who has this magical briefcase, who is going around New York when some break out, and he has to go and try and capture them. On the flip side of that, you've also got the whole wizard in politics. You've got the Makusa, I believe it's called, which is the magical...
The Magical Congress, the Magical Congress of the United States of America.
There we go. You're the Harry Potter fan on this one. So yes, you've kind of got that as a side story, which ultimately culminates all the way through the film. So let's talk about our thoughts based on the trailers for this one, and then we'll get into the movie. So I remember seeing them, and obviously David Yates coming back. That's great. He directed Order of the Phoenix onwards. We talked about this in our review for that, how he was kind of... Although he didn't set the stage and the foundation, that was Chris Columbus and the other two directors they had after that, he did have that consistent feel to the last couple of films, which we felt like the series needed. So it's nice to bring him back for this one. He's directing all five of the movies in this series. Whether he's going to get burnt out with it, we don't know. But I remember seeing the trailers, and although visually it looked completely in keeping with the last couple of Harry Potter films in terms of its, the color correction on it and just the feel of it, the costumes, everything like that, none of the trailers wowed me for that. Even all the ones that came out, I never really kind of got the hype behind it. It looked like I couldn't really tell what the story was. The whole magical creatures thing looked completely fine in it, and the performances looked like they were playing the characters as they were meant to. But in terms of a story, I couldn't really grasp a hold of anything or get hyped behind anything because I didn't ultimately know what it was going to be about to fit the movie. And after seeing the movie, I still kind of feel that way. I felt it was slightly unfocused. But before we go into that, what did you think of the trailers?
It's a weird one, considering how hyped up I've been. The first two trailers that dropped, I kind of, not phased out, but I wasn't, not necessarily excited. I wasn't in the Harry Potter hype at the time. Mm-hmm. And then by the time the final one dropped, I was really looking forward to it. There was just something about it coming back which was really cool. I was buzzing for it. I've been rereading the books, obviously. But I think me and you spoke at great lengths that we're not the biggest fans of Eddie Redmayne.
So, no.
So hard when the lead character of a franchise is an actor that I just can't get behind because I don't know him. He's probably a nice guy. There's just something about his films which didn't work for me. So that didn't help. But I will talk about that as the review goes on because I'm a very changed person now. But it was towards the end. I think it was the first mention of Grindelwald in trailer 3 that really caught my eye. But I mean, I love the whole B stuff. But it was the whole how are you going to form a story around it, and they kind of get to it. But it was a slow build up. I think of looking forward to it.
Yeah, and talking about the Grindelwald thing, we've discussed theories about the whole marketing for this film, how that came into it more towards the end, where they were talking about that Grindelwald was going to be a part of this thing and the casting came out for it. Not going to go into spoilers right now, but I think that was maybe an intentional decision. Maybe it wasn't generating enough hype as they were expecting. That being said, it's made a hell of a lot at the box office. I don't know how long this is going to stay at number one, probably for the next couple of weeks. I would say maybe until Moana comes out. General consensus, mainly positive reviews. It's currently at 76 on Rotten Tomatoes based on 198 reviews. So I think that's just 2% under Order of the Phoenix, isn't it? I think Order of the Phoenix is currently on 78, which is the lowest rated Harry Potter film. And I will kind of agree with this. You do have to look at it as its own thing, though I don't think it's fair to compare them to the Harry Potter films. I know you absolutely almost have to because it is a spin-off. But I do think you should look at these ones on their own. It'll be interesting to see where they go once the sequels come out. But yeah, going back to the Eddie Redmayne point, I think we've gone on record and compare him to, he's like a wet flannel in all his movies. He's not the worst actor, but he just really doesn't have any of that charisma or leading man star power. Even if I'm comparing to The Hobbit again, Martin Freeman as Bilbo, so likable, just completely was that character, but he still had a lot to him as the actor. Eddie Redmayne, to me, is just very similar in everything he's in, maybe with exception to The Theory of Everything, because I know that's the one he won the Oscar for. I still haven't seen that movie. I'm sure he's great in it, but everything else I've seen him in just really hasn't done anything for me. So that was another factor that was kind of putting me off. And let's talk about your actual cinema-going experience with this one, because in the Harry Potter reviews, we talked about our memories. And this should be an interesting comparison. I saw this movie in 2D. You went to IMAX 3D. How was that? Because I still have never been to an IMAX in my life.
It was... Jesus, you've still never been.
Oh, no. Need to.
It was incredible there because the 3D, they nailed it. There's a lot of it, but they've done a decent... I think they shot it in 3D, I'd assume, because of how well it's done, the sense of depth, especially when the beasts come on little flying onto the screen. I think if I was watching in 2D, it'd probably be really obvious what was meant to be 3D. Mm-hmm. But what I the IMAX experience is just always great. And for a film like this, I'd have loved to have seen the later Harry Potter films at an IMAX, but I never unfortunately did. But towards the end, when you get the climax, you can see, not necessarily spoiling it, but it suits it for what's to come. And I think for the future films, when it gets darker and there's more wizarding duels, which I'm assuming will happen, they are doing the Grindelwald story, but I'll save that for later in case people don't know. I'm assuming IMAX will come into it, but I really enjoyed it for it.
Packed house, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was absolutely full. The cinema was heaving. I mean, it's Friday opening day, so it's very expected to be like that. But I think with the old Harry Potter, people messaging me in the morning saying they'd been to midnight and asked if I'd seen it yet. And it's just one of them where it's like an event, and it's not as big, this one. Obviously, nothing's going to compare to the later Harry Potter films in terms of stature, but that's still very broad that the Potter people are talking and going to see it.
Yeah, definitely. So that's sort of all the stuff before the film. Let's just jump straight into the movie now. So we've referred to him before. Let's go with the main characters. So again, this is all spoiler free. We'll get into spoilers later. Let's touch on Eddie Redmayne as Newt Scamander. You said you were won over with him in this movie. I still wasn't. He really didn't do anything for me. And I think the character that we'll talk about next, Jacob Kowalski, to me, was almost like the main protagonist in this movie. He's the one that the audience connects with. He's like the audience's proxy into this wizarding world. So I gravitated much more towards his character, and also the fact that he played, is it Hutch?
Fanboys, yeah.
In Fanboys, yeah. We both recognised him from something. I couldn't place it, and then you messaged me saying it was Fanboys. That blew my mind when I found out. Eddie Redmayne, his character in this is, again, like a very shy, sort of ditzy, bumbling character. But you can tell he genuinely does have that love and passion for the creatures. He says throughout the film, like, we should study these creatures more, get them back to their habitats, and not go out and kill them, everything like that. And in that respect, he is a very nice sort of character. There's not really a bad bone in his body. It was just the performance. There was never really any moments with him as a character that did it for me. We get some references to his past, which I'm sure they're going to, elaborate on more in future sequels. But to me, he was one of the weakest characters, and I think as a protagonist, they've got to be standout in somewhat. But I just loved every time Jacob Kowalski, his character, was on screen. But for Eddie Redmayne, not so much. Although the creatures, which we'll get onto later, were some of the standout things in this film, where Eddie Redmayne was trying to capture them all.
Yeah, see, with Eddie Redmayne, I mean, we spoke a minute ago that I never really liked him, and he won me over, and it was... I don't know if it was the character of Newt and how Newt's been written, and that he did an okay job of it. But there's something about him where he's a very likable person. I mean, obviously he's the good guy, but he's just different to what we've seen before. There's never really been the magic. I mean, Hagrid loves his creatures, but we can't compare him to a giant. Whereas this guy's a magicologist, I think they're saying his job title is. Yeah. And we kind of not introduced him, but they make out he's an outcast. He's very different to the humans. You can tell that he much prefers being with the beasts to the humans. So I like the dynamic to him, but I think as the film went on, he just became not necessarily more likable, but I think Eddie Redmayne suited what they were looking for, and that's what I think I'm gravitating towards. And then when you start getting the minor bits of sort of tidbits, he stays in character, even if they're getting a bit darker. But it's a very interesting character that I'm intrigued to see what they do in the future films, because I'm assuming he's going to be in all 5 of them. I'd be very shocked if he isn't.
Yeah, and it's kind of refreshing to see a protagonist that's not like, I mean, not bad-mouthing the Harry Potter character or anything like that, but where it's not just a person destined for greatness or someone part of some grand prophecy where they're going to become the chosen one. He is kind of just a guy doing his job that gets pulled into this this adventure that he gets thrust upon, and he has to, try and figure it all out along the way. And I liked that about the character, but it was more just the Eddie Redmayne performance for me that didn't quite gel with me. Again, like, I'm sure if I met him in person, he's probably like a great guy who, you could talk to, have a great time with, but just in his movies, there's just something about it that just winds me up. But alongside him, we get introduced to some new characters. Let's talk about the next main one. So Jacob Kowalski, played by Dan Fogler. Love this guy. This guy was amazing. He's probably one of my favourite characters out of all the Harry Potter films, and including this one. All the jokes hit with the audience. They were laughing out loud at everything he was doing. And as I said, he is the audience proxy. Out of all the characters, he is the one you connect with the most. Although you've seen this wizarding world before in all the Harry Potter films, there's still a lot of new stuff that you haven't seen before in this movie. So it's nice to see his reaction again. There is a line from the trailer that doesn't make it into the movie, which I'm assuming was just done as a trailer line, which is where he's like, "I want to be a wizard." I was looking out for that in the movie. That didn't feature in there. But again, he's just such a nice character. And whether it's like the physical comedy side or whether it's his expressions or his outbursts, I thought Dan Fogler was great. And I'd like to see, he probably won't get any sort of like nomination or anything like that, but I genuinely think he was the standout and did kind of save this movie for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've really liked him. What I liked most, this is the whole cast in all honesty. For the first time, we're being tricked into a sort of part of film where they're all adults. I mean, obviously, even at Deathly Hallows Part 2, they're still 17-year-olds. So there's something quite different about meeting people in their 20s. They've got jobs, they work in the day, stuff like that. And he's just this really nice guy that wants to set up a bakery. And you're right from the perspective. In the Harry Potter films, we follow Harry in the sense that we're introduced to magic as he is. We follow his point of view. Whereas in this, it's very much not Dan Fogler, sorry, Jacob Kowalski. I like the fact we're introduced with him, we follow him, we see it from his perspective as well as the others. So there's some really good dynamic in the writing of the characters that I like, which did appear. And what I liked, Tate said before, and this is the main reason he spoke of when he was looking forward to see it, it's so exciting to see a Muggle be an important character because, except the Dursleys, we've never really had anything like that. And now we have a protagonist who is one. So there's always that dynamic of what's going to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I think he hands down saved the film for me. I loved his performance, everything he did. He's a nice character. He's got the dream, as you said, opening the bakery. And you ultimately do want to see him achieve that throughout the film. It's nice. I loved all his scenes. And we get another two characters really as the main two, the people in the main, what's the word I'm looking for? The quartet, yes. So we have the character of Porpentina, or Tina Goldstein, played by Catherine Waterston. I didn't recognize her from any movies before I checked her filmography. I know that she was in Steve Jobs. She played the ex of Steve Jobs in there. She was great in that movie. I can't really say a lot about her character, though. I think out of the quartet, I think she was probably the weakest. They do some setup with like setting up future romances in the movie, which to me, like all the romance stuff for all the people involved was very trite and seemed very shoehorned in. I didn't really get the chemistry between anyone. And other than that, she's just kind of along for the ride. That she's not really the focus alongside Eddie Redmayne or Dan Fogler. And in all honesty, I think her character's really forgettable. Like, I'm actually struggling now to think of anything about her. I think she was an ex-Aura. She lost a job for attacking a Muggle, or a nomad, as they're called in the US. And that's really it. Like, I didn't get anything else from her character. I think I got a lot more from her sister in it, Queenie Goldstein, who's played by Alison Sudol, who's hilarious. She has a very different personality, different persona. She has a nice bit of flirtation with the character of Jacob Kowalski. And I liked her a lot more. She was a lot more quirky. She had personality, whereas to me, the character of Tina really didn't, especially when she's your main lead actress. Didn't really get much from her.
See, I think this is where we're going to start to differ because I really liked her. And I don't know whether that's the setting or whatever, but it was interesting seeing this character that's not Hermione. I mean, we've got a female lead that isn't always right. She's an ex-Aura. She's been kicked off because of something that's happened before. And her heart's in the right place. But I thought it was fascinating to finally meet her, not her, but a character of importance that isn't always right. And she just added this sort of extra dynamic that she's almost introducing us, the audience, into the American aspect. Although we're following Jacob with the magic, introduced into magic, us, like me, you people in the Harry Potters, are following her and being introduced to the American aspect of the magic stuff. But I quite liked what they did with the character. And what I liked is, obviously, in the 1920s New York, it's very different in terms of like gender, stuff like that. I'm not going to go into that. But the whole how women are sneered upon stuff. I like what they do with the character of the Goldstein sisters. They're very much a part of the time. But I really liked her. I mean, I don't know, not necessarily the performance, but I think the way she was written, it was just a bit different. And I think she works very well with Eddie Redmayne together. I thought their chemistry was okay together because there was almost like he was a father figure to Jacob while she's almost a mother figure to her younger sister. So you kind of feel like they're like leading the two of them around on the journey and they're doing the hard work and the others are kind of there. But I quite enjoyed what they did for her, and I thought she's very different to what we've seen in the other Potter films.
The thing is with this movie, and I was going to save this for later, it's sort of like my roundup, but I guess I'll go for it now. This strikes me as a movie. Now, I know this is a foundation movie and you've got to set everything up. If we're going for general opinions now, I think you liked it a lot. I really didn't care for it. I found it very forgettable as a movie. It's going to be one of those movies where I think once you're 2 or 3 films in, maybe when you go back to this one, things will have made a lot more sense. You can go back to this one and see it as that setup movie. That's kind of what I'm hoping that Star Wars The Force Awakens is like. Once I get to episode 8 and 9, maybe I will look back at Force Awakens and have a new opinion on it. And that's kind of where I'm at with this movie now. The whole relationship thing, I didn't buy into it all. Maybe between Jacob and Alison, maybe though. Oh, sorry, Queenie. Sorry, I'm looking at the actress there. Maybe between those two, because they are genuinely nice together. And although it's very much just sort of instant flirtation, there's more of a connection there because they both love to cook, so they have shared interests. She's never spoken to a nomad before, so she's intrigued by him. He's intrigued by her. So you can see them together that way. For me, it was like Eddie Redmayne's there and Tina's there, so they just have to get together. I never really got a good chemistry between those two, but maybe in sequels I will. Now, I know you can't really justify that for this movie. This has to be a good film on its own, and those factors alone kind of weakened it for me. And another factor that I thought was really bad in this movie, which we can get onto now, was the villain side of it, was the villainous side aspect of the film. So your main villain in this movie, you kind of have two, but I can't really go too deep into this. That'll be in spoilers because I don't want to give anything away. But your main one is Percival Graves, played by Colin Farrell. Really a nothing character for me in this film in terms of his villain aspect in the film. He just has kind of a lot of exposition scenes alongside Ezra Miller's character. And it's just really trite, stock villain, things. It's like, I want to train you up and be, you can be ultra powerful, and then it'll cut back to the main story. You only really get scenes like that. There was never a scene where they get fleshed out as characters. Maybe more so Ezra Miller, but Colin Farrell, don't really get all that much with him.
It's really it's really hard to talk about this because the character itself, he is the villain of the piece, but he's the villain in the sense that he is doing his job. Being an Auror, he's got to hunt down the people, he's got to hunt these guys down. And, God, I'm struggling here.
No, because I made that point how he doesn't really get much to do. We don't see much of him.
He's so two-dimensional. It all adds up at the end. That's all I can say about spoiling it. But I think Colin Farrell suited what they were looking for in someone that when he's quite serious and trying to be intimidating, he can be intimidating to the right person. But I'm going to try and save that for later on because I'm choosing my words very carefully. But it does lack an outright villain. I think the problem is, not to start the Harry Potter comparisons, from the get-go in Harry Potter, he's the boy who lived. There's a guy that's so bad they can't say his name. And because in this, you just can't... Christ.
It's so tough, isn't it?
They're never going to match that, basically. And it's going to be so hard, especially for a first film, because down the line, there is going to be arguably a fantastic villain, if you excuse the pun. But for this film, it seemed very generic to introduce it. Maybe I'm comparing it to the first Harry Potter film. There's generic in the sense that Quirrell, it was just Voldemort using someone. It's not necessarily generic, but it was a surprise twist. Whereas this follows down a similar trend. Yeah, which I'm just talking about too much.
Yeah, I won't dwell on it, but I will say the twist in this movie, me and you did kind of predict it. We just didn't know the ways and means of how it would all come about, but we absolutely did. If I'm going to compare it, though, I'd compare it to Goblet of Fire, because we look at that, and although we've seen Voldemort in the Harry Potter franchise before, as soon as Ralph Fiennes shows up, and he's hilarious, and we've talked ad nauseum how much we love Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort, there's that connection immediately. He's memorable. You remember how he looks, his voice, his mannerisms in this as Colin Farrell, Percival Graves. He's just... I'm really genuinely struggling to talk about most of the characters in this movie. He was just... just nothing really. But Ezra Miller, I do want to talk about him. Not so much his character. his family's very interesting in the movie, and you know he is a character with a lot of sympathy in the film. There are some nice scenes with him. I haven't seen him in anything before, and I was really interested to see him in this movie because obviously he's going to be playing the Flash in Justice League and his own movie later down the line in the DC universe. He gets a lot to do in the Justice League trailer, but I wanted to see him in a movie. And I actually think, in terms of performances, he was great in this movie. He had a lot of genuinely moving scenes, heartbreaking scenes where he'd be crying, he'd be breaking down. He felt like a tortured character. He did feel like a character with all the weight of the world on his shoulders, and I liked that. I would have liked a little bit more of it because there were some moments. Now, I don't know if I can compare this because although you're a hardcore Harry Potter fan, this is still a new adventure. But me as a casual fan, I struggled to keep up with some of the things in this movie. I expect it to be like if someone was watching Lord of the Rings who doesn't know the world and they're throwing names and places and lore at you. If you're not familiar with it, it can be a bit daunting. I got elements of that with this film. In terms of the plot, sometimes I wasn't following it. And I mentioned this to you, but the audio in our cinema really wasn't great. And with Eddie Redmayne as a character who's kind of mumbles and like socially awkward, some of the times I did struggle to pick up on bits of dialogue and I had to kind of piece it together once it got later down the line. That may have just been the cinema I was in though, because you apparently had great audio at yours, but then again you did see it on IMAX.
Yeah, I was going to say it's hard because I think Interstellar was similar in that some cinemas. Yeah. I think it would depend on the cinema and all that sort of stuff, but because he's a very mumbly character and it's just one of those where it might be in the cinema, but I could hear pretty much most of it. But then again, that's the IMAX format where they do take a lot more time to release it into IMAX than they do other places.
Yeah.
With Ezra Miller, I mean, he's playing a character called Credence Barebone, and they're off the trailers. I think they're called the Second Salems, where it's almost an anti-witch cult. They're saying, you know, witches do exist. We're gonna find them, and it's this really creepy cult, and it makes for some not necessarily disturbing scenes, but what we see on screen that relates to Ezra Miller, I thought was very, very different because this isn't spoiling it. They're saying in the trailers that we have to hide in the shadows. That's what the American wizards are saying, whereas in the English one, they're not scared, as in they don't bother with muggles, but there's the whole connection that we're not hiding underneath. There's just the minor things. It's not really touched upon in the films, but there's a Muggle Prime Minister, and every single one knows about. Every Prime Minister finds out about the Wizarding World, stuff like that. Whereas they're terrified for anything to happen. Which it was an interesting take on the politics of it, given the time and just the mannerisms of America. But the anti-witch cult was, in terms of villains goes, you could argue they're more villainous than Percival Graves was, which is a credit to the writing of them because I didn't ever expect to see some twisted cult in a Harry Potter film.
Yeah, no, and that brings us nicely onto the world itself, actually, and that whole dynamic between Muggles and the Wizarding World I thought was really fascinating in this film. It was a side of the Harry Potter series I haven't really seen before, and I would have liked for them to develop that a little bit more. Maybe they will in the future, so maybe this was just a setup. I did find all that stuff fascinating and how they were so against each other. But the world itself, let's talk about New York and sort of how they brought the Wizarding World to the US. So we knew there was a US Wizarding School. If you know your Harry Potter stuff, there's a US one and I believe a French one.
There's 12 Wizarding schools.
Okay.
Obviously, we all know Beauxbatons and Durmstrang.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I didn't find out about the American one until a few months ago when I was on Pottermore and they asked me if I wanted to get sorted into an American house. I'm not a racist, but I said no, I'm a Slytherin, so I don't have to change that. And it gets briefly mentioned, Ilvermorny, I think it's called. But it's just the case that there are schools in different places. There is magic everywhere. And what I really was looking forward to in this film was seeing the new world, how different the American wizards are to the English ones, how the communities differ. And if I'm going to be honest, one of the only minor criticisms I have of the film is I feel like I don't see enough of that wizarding community.
Yes,
because
that would be mine too.
They show you the Makusa headquarters, which look fantastic, really good set design. You get a kind of a bar, which you see in the trailers. You get these little snippets, but then unfortunately it's not spoiling it. They go into places like New York Zoo. I mean, there's a lot of normal street scenes, which I've got no issue with. But it's just you want to see more of this world and you're sort of tibited. But then, again, we see a different world inside his suitcase. And I think across the next few films, they've already said Paris is going to be next. So it's going to be almost almost an adventure if they're going to go to different places with these different films. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to see a bit more of the American community.
Yeah, and I know I said at the start that you kind of have to look at this thing as its own thing, but if I make another comparison to Harry Potter, if you look at Philosopher's Stone, for example, we've talked about this. It's one of the best world building movies or like books, novels you'll ever see. I mean, from Diagon Alley to Hogwarts itself, even the stuff like and with the Dursleys with the owls, like they're so memorable. And in this, you really only get the Makusa headquarters, and I'm really struggling to think of anything. And obviously, the stuff in the suitcase. But other than that, you really don't get a lot. And because it's set in New York, 1920s New York, which I think is a really interesting setting. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. There's a lot of different quirky things you could bring to the US Wizarding world. There's not a lot of it, and I would have loved a little bit more world building. It does have to deal with a lot of plot, obviously, and a lot of characters and new characters they have to set up. Maybe a little bit more I'd have loved to have seen. There's a great scene in a bar, which we can talk about in the spoilers. That's kind of in the trailers as well, though. Kind of reminded me of the US Wizarding Cantina band almost from Star Wars. So I did like that stuff. Let's talk about the creatures, though. I mean, that's what the film's called, Fantastic Beasts. Absolutely loved it. And this was the stuff of the film alongside the character of Jacob, where this was where the movie really shined for me. And I was genuinely this was the magic I felt with the Harry Potter films. With this new one, all the creatures were really creative. The effects on them were outstanding. I loved Eddie Redmayne's connection to them and how he was tending to them. He was almost like a zookeeper in the suitcase. Loved all that stuff. And especially when some of them broke out and reacting with the world. There's a great little creature called the Niffler, who we can talk about in the spoilers. It's like a little kind of echidna hedgehog-looking thing who's absolutely adorable. Just brought the house down in laughter every time he was on screen. So stuff like that I really liked, and that's why, although I didn't wholeheartedly love this movie and I mostly kind of found it very forgettable, there are moments in it, such as all the moments with the creatures, where I liked it. And that's where I'm torn on the film, because it does feel like a film that doesn't have much focus. And I think that mostly comes from the script, even if it is written by J.K. Rowling, and the narrative flow of it. It feels like a lot of movies, like ingredients from different types of movies, different tones, and it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. On the one hand, it feels like it wants to be just a very kid-friendly Eddie Redmayne trying to capture creatures movie. Is almost like a Ghostbuster trying to get them back in the suitcase. And then on the other side, it's the dark sort of tone that you get in the last couple of Harry Potter movies, where it's very political, very dark, very menacing, and setting up for future movies. It feels like those two things clashed into one, and I don't know if the tones worked. For example, like the pacing of it, I really struggled with this movie for like the first hour. I didn't know really what it was getting at, what it was trying to do. There didn't seem to be any plot or goal for the characters. And although you have Eddie Redmayne try to go off and capture creatures in there, which was all great stuff, then it would cut to, you know, like Ezra Miller or Colin Farrell's character and the whole wizarding political system and the Makusa headquarters, and nothing seemed to gel. It felt like two different plot threads that didn't really tie together. I guess it kind of ultimately culminates at the end, and you could argue that it does. But for me, for the bulk of the movie, it felt like two different stories that were trying to be told at once.
Yeah, and I think this falls down to the whole planned series thing, where we know there's going to be 5 films, and we can't have 5 films on animals escaping a suitcase. Not this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved the beast elements. I mean, I know we've jumped the wagon, but what I love most about them is they don't shove them in our face. We get a very good scene where they introduce... You see lots of them, but you could argue there is maybe 4 or 5 beasts which are centered upon, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
And you learn about these ones, whereas the other ones, they're in the case, but you're seeing them and they're not chucking them in your face. So there's not so many different things to know about them. I don't know if that really comes across right, but I thought that was a strong point, because it could be so hard for them to release 100 creatures and you have to take 100 and you don't get to know any of them. Whereas the 3 or 4 we get centered upon, you learn a lot about, and you kind of want to see more of them and more of the other ones, because there's so many that you see, and the design on them is incredible. I mean, we'll talk about the production design later, but every Harry Potter film, from the sets to the creatures to the characters, costumes, they're always fantastic, even wand designs. And in this, they nail it with the creatures, because it is the name of the film, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. And we've got the incredible TARDIS case, which essentially is. And then if we're going to cut to the darkness, I think that's the thing. I think it would have been so not simple because that's that's a nasty word for it. But if you hadn't have anything setting up the future films, it would have felt like too much of a standalone film that you couldn't have a sequel. I don't know if that really works. I mean, I think this is a standalone film that by the time we get to the future ones, you'll be able to watch one on its own. I'll talk about that a lot more in the spoiler section. Whereas in the future ones, I think they'll be far more collated together than this one was. But I loved what we got to explore. And like I said earlier, the problem we didn't get enough of the new Wizarding stuff, but the suitcase and that headquarters were very, very good. It's just you felt like I wanted something more. But the actual beasts themselves are incredible.
I mean, it felt like just peaks and wanes for me in this movie. Like every time a creature would be on screen, or Eddie Redmayne's, like, he shows a lot of physical comedy in this. Actually, like there's a bit involving a chandelier with him, which was really funny. And every time they were on screen, that's where my excitement ramped up, and then it dropped. And I think the pacing was very inconsistent with this movie. But you talk about the sequels and how you think this one will be viewed as self-contained. For me, the best sequels are the ones that are almost feel self-contained each time. Like I talk about, if you look at Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, very different movies. Yes, one's a sequel to the other, but you can watch them on their own. And I prefer sequels like that. Or Empire Strikes Back, for example. But I know that links into Return of the Jedi. I'm going on a massive tangent right now. The point is, I felt that unlike, say, like Philosopher's Stone or even Chamber of Secrets, I felt that this one did set up more, and I think the focus was on setup, especially when we come to the ending, which felt like it had, like Return of the King, had about like 6 to 10 different endings. It just never seemed to want to end. Let's talk about the script on this one. You own the script. You haven't read it yet, but you've bought it. For me, this was the weakest aspect of the film. I thought the script was not bad, but I think it was just inconsistent. I don't think it wrote character very well, apart from Jacob. He's always going to be the exception. And it just felt, I've talked about this, but it didn't feel like it had any narrative drive, at least up until about like the hour and a half mark. Towards the end, you can kind of see where the plot's going and what the gist of the film is. But for the first half or more of the film, I really was kind of just watching it, and it was moving scene to scene, and it didn't seem like it had any through line. That was at least my opinion with it. But what about yours?
See, I liked the script. The one, not necessarily criticism, what I said earlier. I feel that the first draft of this script would have been 90% Fantastic Beasts, 10% setup for the future films. And I'd assume over production, when a trilogy became a pentology, that it naturally slowly dropped to about 55-45, which it is.
Can you remember when they made that announcement? How
yes.
far into it was?
What, there was going to be a trilogy or it was going to be 5?
Well, they initially said trilogy, didn't they? I can't remember.
They always said
they
trilogy.
5.
5 was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a big fan event in London, which unfortunately I won tickets to but couldn't go. And they were having a Q&A. The whole cast were there. They showed IMAX clips, this sort of really cool thing. And then J.K. Rowling just dropped out of the blue, yeah, there's going to be 5 films now. The cast didn't know. Obviously David Heyman, the producer, did. I don't think the director knew. But I think in her head, I mean, we've spoken about before on the other Harry Potter reviews that, to me, she is a walking encyclopedia. There are stories of the stuff she knows, what she tells people. She's got it all in her head, and I've got the faith in her to do that. And I think she's gone for such a rich story that I'm hoping it needs the 5 films. Because in all honesty, what's different with this is, what I don't think I've spoken on the podcast yet, but I've said to people, with every Harry Potter film, I went in knowing what was going to happen. And you always knew that it would finish at the Deathly Hallows, but you knew how it finished at the Deathly Hallows if you read the books.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, because we're going in with a blind eye, we don't know her plan. Whereas obviously previously you can watch Goblet of Fire, but you knew what's going to happen in the following 2 books. So it's one of them where I think it's almost adapting to new circumstances, in that other fans don't know what's going to happen, and whether that makes it harder and the setting up is more obvious than it was before, I don't know. But the script itself, it's going to be very fascinating to read, because obviously this is J.K. Rowling's first ever screenplay, and it's just going to be interesting. Obviously she follows the traditional screenplay, but the one you'll read the book will be very different to, I assume, the filming one. But I just think it's interesting that a book writer's going into a screenplay, because you don't get many of them as well.
No, and she said she's always wanted to do screenplays as well, I think, hasn't she? She did want to make that move into it. These films have got the benefit that with Harry Potter, they kind of fluctuated. I think like the first 2 were filmed within a year apart of each other. Then they took like 2-year gaps, and then I think another one was done a year after. These ones are all going to be spread out 2 years between each one, which gives her plenty of time to get the scripts up to a specification. She's clearly got an end goal of where she wants to take the story if she has made that decision, and that's come from her that it's going to be 5. I don't think that would be a studio thing, because J.K. Rowling, as we've said, is very passionate about her own world, and if she thinks it needs to be 5 movies, then I have to take her word for it that that's going to be, for the benefit of the story overall. I only know one element of the story where it's going to go involving the villain, and if that's all the film is going to build up to, then I don't think you need 5 movies to tell that story. I think you could very easily do that in a trilogy. It depends if she's going to bring even more stuff into it, because I don't really know all the events around this time frame that it's set in the Harry Potter world.
And none of us do. Without revealing too much of a villain, the Harry Potter canvas is essentially blank until 1945, which is where you have a famous battle with Dumbledore and Grindelwald, but that also leads to Voldemort sort of not asking to be a teacher. Essentially, there is no history in the Harry Potters between the early 1900s and 1945, so it's kind of filling in this gap now, which I think it makes it more interesting to JK. But what I find fascinating is that she, although it's Warner Bros. Had the rights, she has a very high point of authority on them. I think she still owns a lot of the production rights, and that 5 films is certainly going to be her idea more than the 3. And I think going back to the Hobbit comparisons, that's where it's in its favour, because the Hobbit had so many different directors and sort of writers tripped around. I think you'll know more about that than I did. Whereas with this film, you're going to get the same cast and crew for 5 films. That's going to benefit it, and I don't think you're going to get any last minute people dropping out.
And I think that even kind of David Yates needs this. Now, although I didn't love this movie, this is actually his second movie that came out this year. It was originally filmed a couple of years ago, but The Legend of Tarzan, which was a movie I absolutely hated. It was boring. It was just a terrible, terrible movie. So I think it almost will be a back to basics for him as well, like to go back to this world. Sometimes that can be a bad thing. We look at other directors now. I know your opinions on it, but we look at George Lucas coming back to the Star Wars universe with the prequel trilogy. Genuinely very unfavorable. Same with Peter Jackson heading back to the Middle Earth world with the Hobbit trilogy. I hope it doesn't go that route with this one. And although I didn't really care for this movie, I wouldn't say it's a poorly made movie. I wouldn't say it's a poorly directed movie. I think it really just comes down to the actual plot. I did think it was very thin for this movie. That might just because it's a setup movie and the plot might get a little more complex as it goes on. Another part, really, really quickly, I want to touch on the editing. There were some scenes in this movie that felt very jumpy to me, like particular scenes and shots. I just felt like I wanted to talk about it. There's a really brief scene at the Makusa headquarters with something that looks like Dobby, what are they called? House elves. He's like on a spinning wheel. And the camera starts panning around it, and then it cuts, and it's on the other side of it. And I thought the film had jumped at our cinema. There were a few scenes like that with some jump cuts. I don't know if you noticed that. It was a really brief point I wanted to pick up. That's more a nitpick.
I didn't necessarily notice that as much. No, not really with the editing stuff. There were some things where they would transition between... suddenly you're in one of the stories, then it goes to the second one. So you've gone from beast to sort of darkness, like the click of the fingers. And it's kind of cool, but sometimes it'd be jarring. But that's in the spoiler section. I can talk about that.
We need to talk about music as well. Now, this isn't bringing back John Williams or anything like that from the Harry Potter franchise, or indeed Alexandre Desplat. This is James Newton Howard, who is brand new to the Harry Potter world. I keep calling it the Harry Potter world, and Harry Potter isn't even involved in it. The Wizarding world, I should say. I loved this soundtrack. Now, this soundtrack, although it's great, it doesn't really have any memorable, definable themes. Like, you come out of Harry Potter, you know the Harry Potter theme, you know some of the themes associated with some of the characters and the places. This one I really don't have that from, and that might be because I've only seen the movie once, but even with Harry Potter, after seeing that once, the music was all memorable. This isn't a bad soundtrack. I actually listened to the soundtrack the day before I went to see it at the cinema, and I loved every track. It's a great, great soundtrack. I would have maybe liked an iconic Fantastic Beasts theme, so that going into the sequels, there's something definable. And we've kind of talked about this, and you would argue that there is, but maybe it's just not to the forefront of the movie. It's a great soundtrack, and although it's set in New York as well, it reminded me of James Newton Howard's music for King Kong. Some very similar motifs and sort of like jazz styles to it, which I appreciated in Peter Jackson's King Kong. Kind of very similar in this as well. And there's a song that plays towards the end, which I won't give the track name because you told me this. All the track names do kind of spoil the movie. But it is very beautiful music when the music does come to the forefront. There just really aren't any definable themes in there. And I think that's kind of a trope with most movies now. I feel like I say this all the time where, yes, the music works for the film, but there's nothing memorable about it.
With me, I think there's one. I enjoy the soundtrack. I bought it yesterday. I mean, you always listen to them before. I always do them after the films. It's not a spoiler, but it's the bit where he gets in the suitcase. It's the sort of tune you hear over most of the trailers, and that comes across like the Fantastic Beasts theme. And it's just going to be interesting to see if they stick with it, and if they stick with James Newton Howard, whether he's come on board to do a soundtrack and a leave, or if they're going to look for consistency. It'll be very interesting to see how the soundtrack shape in the future. But also this one, I mean, the Makusa headquarters has a theme, but some of it's just very generic background sound. But it's a great soundtrack to listen to.
Yeah, definitely. And I really do hope they have consistency. We've talked about that with the Marvel movies, how their lack of consistency to me hurts their characters and hurts the themes and the emotions between the sequels and the Avengers and stuff like that. And I would like to see some of that consistency here. The Harry Potter series was very sort of all over the place with the consistency. We've talked about that in our reviews. Not bad soundtracks across the board, but it would be nice if James Newton Howard did stick around for at least two films or three films. The Harry Potter theme, I guess this isn't a spoiler, but the Harry Potter theme does play in it about 2 or 3 times throughout the film. I guess it was a theme we tied with Harry Potter, but now it's just the Wizarding world in general. I remember when you sent me the preview, like when they released a little snippet, a little excerpt of the soundtrack, you sent me that, and I did kind of go on a rant saying, like, why have they used the Harry Potter theme? It's got nothing to do with him. After watching this, though, because we have to think about it as well, in terms of like geekdom and fandom, this is a big thing for the Harry Potter world, because when those movies ended, there really hasn't been anything in between. With Star Wars, that's made a comeback. With Lord of the Rings, we had the Hobbit franchise. With Harry Potter, it was just kind of nothing. It was kind of dead. So now, Cursed Child's out at the theaters. You've got this. You've got all the scripts that are going to go with it, and probably for like the next 10 years with all the sequels. So I think, in a sense, it makes sense that they play the Harry Potter theme, because it is that easing you back into the world. You hear that theme, you're instantly in the Wizarding world. So it didn't bother me when I watched the film. I felt it was necessary, and it crops up here and there in the film, but it's really subtly done, and I think it works for the film still.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a spoiler. It's in the clouds. They stick to the old formula.
Yeah.
Warner Bros. In the clouds, logo appears, and then they transition into the Fantastic Beasts theme in the clouds. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. But you're right. I mean, every franchise needs a defining sort of theme. Marvel, you're right, doesn't have one. DC doesn't really have one. They have bits of individual themes, which maybe this does, and to some similar degree. But the sort of the Hedwig theme, the opening 5-6 seconds is so recognizable as well. I mean, if that was played on the radio, you'd know what it is. Everyone would know what it is. And it's just something they should keep intact together, because although it's set in a different era, it's still the Wizarding theme.
Yeah. So I guess we'll go into overall thoughts and opinions now. I think we'll handle this in the way we can do that at the end after spoilers. George, give me your biggest positive for the film and your biggest negative, and then we'll move into spoilers after that.
The biggest positive is the actual beasts themselves.
Yeah.
Biggest negative, most people know I don't really hate a lot of films, and I always look at the positives. But to me, as a fan, the only negative was the lack of sort of magical things, because we only got the suitcase and the headquarters, not much else.
Yeah. For me, I'm exactly the same. Biggest positive for the film is either the creatures, or, if I'm going to be different, Dan Vogler. I thought his performance really elevated the film and made it worth watching just for his character.
Actually, I have another minor criticism, which I should have said at the start.
Yeah.
When you compare it to Harry Potter, which I don't want to do, the supporting cast of Harry Potter is without doubt one of the best supporting casts in cinema. If you've got a 20-minute scene, you might get 1 minute of Snape and 30 seconds of McGonagall, which is this massive bursts of relief, a bit of Hagrid here and there. It's almost like shoving things in, and it works, it fits. Whereas because we're in unknown territory and we're not at school, we essentially just have the 4 main characters.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the fact it's a different era now. But that is the one thing it did miss, was that extortionate cast. But then again, this is its own thing. It's not Harry Potter.
And sort of like jumping off that, it's kind of weird because although we're in New York City, this huge, expansive city, we've got magical creatures, we've got this entire, landscape, and even the climax of this film, which I'm not going to give away. But regardless of all that, it still feels a lot smaller compared to the Harry Potter film, even Philosopher's Stone, which is just, kids at school dealing with an evil wizard, Lord Voldemort. In this, there's all the political side to it as well. But yeah, as a movie, and even the sets and things like that, it still feels a lot smaller scale than the Harry Potter films that have come before it, which is really strange. Maybe they'll go, for scale in the next ones, and I feel like I'm repeating myself with that, but we really don't know until we see the other films. But yeah, positives for me, all the stuff with the creatures, the Fantastic Beasts were amazing, loved all that stuff. Dan Fogler puts in a great performance. Negative for me is really just the pace of it and sort of the narrative drive of it. As I said, I had a really hard time with like the first hour and a bit of this movie where there was nothing really for me to like latch onto. There was no sort of, we need to go here and established rules. It was kind of, you're just watching individual scenes play out with no narrative through lines. So that would be really my biggest negative, I think. And that's kind of why I think I sort of zoned out a lot in this movie, because I just couldn't get behind anything. But that'll do it for our spoiler-free section, so we'll move into spoilers now. So if you haven't seen Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, you don't want to be spoiled with anything, turn this review off, come back to it after you have seen it, because we are going to spoil the hell out of this thing, starting with the main villain. George, you know a lot more about this whole backstory stuff, but Grindelwald, Johnny Depp, who was announced, I want to say like a couple of weeks before the movie came out. It was really relatively close to release date. Go for it. Just Grindelwald.
Right. For those that don't know, Grindelwald is the original Voldemort. He was the darkest of the dark before Voldemort was here. Crazy guy. He had a fling with Dumbledore when they were young. There's a Dumbledore dynamic, which is what you'll hear on the news when they start casting him again. Grindelwald's the big bad guy that got no exposition in the 7th film, who's in a lot of the book, and you can find out a lot of details, which I always said we'll get to in our Deathly Hallows reviews when they come out. I'll be speaking about it then. I've waited so long to kind of not necessarily see him on screen, because we got like a few seconds of him before, but we're now going to hear of his stories for his prime. And when they announced 5 films, I said, like, I can get behind this. In theory, Voldemort was around he was in physical form for 4 films, but he was around for the entirety of the series. So there's so much they can do there. And when they announced Johnny Depp, I was really behind it. I mean, he's an actor I like. I don't love him. I'm not the biggest Jack Sparrow fan. I haven't seen Black Mass, but he's someone that you can get an absolutely incredible performance from. So if he was announced as Grindelwald, I was like, okay, this could be his comeback. Then they dropped he's got a cameo in this.
And I think that basically that confirmed our suspicions, didn't it, of how we thought this movie was going to go from that.
I mean, in the poster for Percival Graves, you see the Deathly Hallows, and I think when it came out, I messaged you, I was there like, he's got the Hallows, he's either a Grindelwald fanatic or he's Grindelwald. You said he's probably Grindelwald, and I was there like, surely they're not going to balls it and do Apologies Potion again. We don't know how he is him. I mean, now in the books I've read, there's a way of transfiguring your face to be like other people, stuff like that. I don't really know, but when they revealed it at the start of the film, I told my friend, I bet you it's Grindelwald, and I just sat there smoking shit at the cinema. I don't know about the costume. We spoke very briefly on Friday night. He's got like a cat eye.
He's got like a dead eye, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Which I don't think he had, like the older actor that we see in Deathly Hallows. I don't think he had that. And I know it's because it's like the hindsight, and back in those days they didn't know they were going to do Fantastic Beasts or Where to Find Them or do the Grindelwald story, so they just get any actor to play old Grindelwald. But he really doesn't look like, now we've got these movies, he doesn't look like an old Johnny Depp, and it's going to be weird, I think, when you get to Deathly Hallows. And I think you see young Grindelwald very briefly, right? I think he steals.
Yeah, so
you see him jump out a window.
Jamie Campbell Bower has the older wand. You see him steal it. He's from the wand maker, but that's a long story. In this we kind of reveal him, and what's hard to explain is we see the cat eye. He's got a mustache. He's got hair. I think I said to you before we started recording, look at Johnny Depp's hair at the start of the year when he filmed his scenes.
Yeah.
It looks exactly like Percival Graves. You said he's got like bright, spiky blonde. Essentially, I'm intrigued, but not reassured by him in this. I know it's 30 seconds, but I'm just going to kind of wait to see what he's like in the next film, because he's going to have his own costume. He won't be wearing Percival Graves's. He'll probably have the Elder Wand. He already has it at this point in the timeline. It's just obviously he's being Percival Graves, so he's got to have his wand and stuff. I'm really excited to see where it's going. And the sort of opening scene I can talk about now is a montage of all the newspapers. They explain the Grindelwald attacks to give a lot of backstory. And from that point on, you know that this film is going to tease the shit out of Grindelwald, and it does really well. And if you look at the marketing, you see why they didn't want to put it in there, because it would have been too obvious. They've had too much media attention towards it. And whereas now we're going to get it over the coming years. So I'm certainly intrigued, but I'm happy because when they first announced this film, I don't know if we used to speak then, but whenever we've spoke about, I always said there's so much more they can do in the Harry Potter world, like the Order of the Phoenix, like Grindelwald. Now we're getting that. So that's why the excitement kicked in of that third trailer when they did name drop Grindelwald, because I knew exactly what it's going to tease. And I'm very interested and excited to see what happens with Johnny Depp.
Yeah, and the casting of Johnny Depp itself is interesting because we look back to when Pirates of the Caribbean came out in 2003, Curse of Black Pearl. Everyone loved him. That was his comeback. That was his resurgence. Everyone loved Jack Sparrow. And then from then on, he was in loads of Tim Burton movies as weird, different, colourful characters, and everyone loved him. But now it feels like everyone's at the stage where they're done with the Johnny Depp trope. The whole thing of him being a colourful clown-like character that looks like he's from a Tim Burton movie has become the trope of Johnny Depp now. As you said, Black Mass, I still haven't seen that myself. That is a movie I really want to see. Tate on the channel did see it, and he said that Johnny Depp was fantastic, and he should have, he was snubbed for an Oscar for that movie, and it did look like he became that character, and he was put in a great acting role. But the amount of people that I think even tweeted J.K. Rowling, right, and even saying like, "Please don't cast Johnny Depp. This is betrayal. We don't want him in the Harry Potter films." She stood by him. She says that no, this is the right cast. This is the right person. They would have auditioned loads of people and found the right person, and maybe Johnny Depp was the right one. We don't really get to see a lot of him to judge him in this movie. However, I can judge him on appearance, and yes, he is another clown-like character that looks like he should be in a Tim Burton movie. The person I compared him to in this, if you go on Google Images and you type in Martin Short, Jack Frost from the Santa Claus 3, he looks exactly like him. He's got this really just wacky, spiky blonde hair and a pale face, and it's just, I'm seeing Johnny Depp again, and I'm like, you're better than this. Like, he looks completely goofy. Now, I guess Voldemort kind of does a bit as well, and mostly that's the personality coming through in Voldemort, which makes him wacky. But I don't know. It's, again, I'm like a broken record, but we're going to have to see when we get to the sequels, when Grindelwald's in it a lot more, and go back to this one to see what it's like. I really hope he's not over the top in it. I really hope he doesn't put in another over the top Johnny Depp performance. I love Johnny Depp, but I did want to see him move away from colourful characters like this a little bit and maybe give them a break for a while and come back to them later. But I think he needs something different, and I'm not sure if Grindelwald is that role.
I mean, it's so early to say. Johnny Depp hasn't done... I mean, obviously, Black Mass, he's a villain. Sweeney Todd, he's dark, he's a villain. He hasn't done the outright neo-Nazi yet. And this is essentially what he's going to play in. I know the costume and the hair thing, what I said is because of that. I don't know if this is true. I hope he doesn't have hair like that. But I think it will be slicked back, like you see at the opening scene. We see over his shoulders. And this, his hair's scruffy and stuff, whether or not that's because he's kind of been arrested or not. But he's the other thing is what differs Johnny Depp is this guy's European, in the sense that he should have an accent of some sort. We don't really get enough time to listen. I would kind of want to rewatch it for that one scene.
I think there was a vague hint of it.
Yeah,
it didn't sound like Johnny Depp's usual voice, even when he is doing a sort of Sweeney Todd-like voice. There was a hint of something there, I think.
The one thing I'm going to say is I said before the film I trust JK's writing, and to be fair to the Harry Potter world and even this, they've never got the casting wrong of characters, especially ones of mass importance. I know you don't like Eddie Redmayne, but I think he does make a very good Newt Scamander. Whereas I think each person they cast is right for their role. And with Grindelwald, I was going to say they could have had anyone because most people would have took that on. And I think with Johnny Depp, they would have trusted him. And I think it could work. Yeah.
But sorry, I thought you were going to carry on there.
No, I was thinking then, I was there like this.
It looked like you were thinking of something else to say about, but so he's really our main villain. Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say there's never been so much to say on someone based off a 30-second cameo.
Yeah, right. And that's what we were talking about earlier with Colin Farrell's character, how we were like, he's very much in the shadows and we don't get to see him a lot and we don't know a lot about him, but if you look at it as a standalone film, that's a problem. But because it's Grindelwald and he is a mysterious character, that's where I'm divided on it, because it makes sense when we find out it's actually him. So Grindelwald, kind of, Percival Graves is our main villain, but really the one who gets the most focus at the halfway point of this film to the end is Ezra Miller as, what's his name?
Credence.
Credence Barebone, who turns out he is a fantastic beast in himself. He is an Obscurus, which is this. It reminded me of the Death Eaters, how they travel through the air like the black smoke, the black mist. And this is the thing that's been terrorizing New York. It's been destroying buildings. It's been killing people. It kills John Voight, because John Voight's in this movie, everyone, and for like 5 minutes, if that. His son's running as like a senator or something. All that stuff kind of went over my head, I'm not going to lie, but the Obscurus is killing people out of frustration. We learn that they're very young when they die. This is the oldest one that Eddie Redmayne's ever seen, and I guess it being a fantastic creature, its natural form is the black smoke, but it can also shapeshift into regular people, which is the character that Ezra Miller plays. And as I said, he does play it very well. He's a very tortured character, abusive upbringing. He is an orphan who's at this orphanage with a character who's kind of like Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, she's hateful. She's a hateful woman in it. And there's another girl there as well who's very weird. She kind of speaks in an almost Nightmare on Elm Street nursery rhyme sister. And I don't know. I guess she was like the red herring in the story. Like, you thought they were referring to her when there was a child with great power. I feel like I'm going into Spider-Man there. Great power comes great responsibility. And I think they were setting her up, and as an audience member, she was like one of the twins from The Shining. Like, there was something off about her, and I think they were expecting you to think that that was the child of great power that Graves wanted to take on as his apprentice. But it turns out it's Ezra Miller. And one of my favorite scenes in the film, and this is where I did start to like the film, but it was a bit too late in that it's like the last 20 minutes or so. The bit where Eddie Redmayne's trying to talk him down on the train tracks, I thought was expertly handled. I thought Eddie Redmayne played that beautifully. You've got Graves on one hand who's saying, like, don't listen to him, come with me, and together we can rule the galaxy as, like, father and son. He's doing that whole speech. Eddie Redmayne's being, because he cares about these creatures, all these creatures, and he is technically a fantastic beast. And you do get that through in his performance, and he's trying to talk him down, and that's working for a while. The whole situation goes to shit and he's thrashing out, and he almost plays it like a disgruntled teenager and, like throwing a tantrum, or, he's angsty, and that comes through in his beast form. The only problem I have with that is the entire climax of this film is basically just a black smoke cloud destroying buildings, which goes on for quite a while. And it doesn't really make for an entertaining viewing experience, I would. So as a climax to a movie, I was a little disappointed, but then it kind of circles back around to the actual character, and I guess it makes sense.
It's the Barebones sort of family thing. I don't know. There's like an orphanage or they're adopted, but the mum's terrifying. She's genuinely fucked up. I can say all this stuff now. We're spoiling stuff. It's so obvious it's going to be the sister, and I think that might be his birth sister because he's protecting her. Percival Graves, like, you're a squib. He just absolutely annihilates Ezra Miller, and then you just get the showdown of when he just destroys all the walls, and they're just ready to fight. I love the fact they bring up squib and stuff like that. Some actual wizarding language, and it was just a black cloud. And the Obscurus I've never really heard of before. I think it's brand new, so I can't sit there and give you an origin story. But what I find more interesting is I'm sure, and I've been trying to backtrack it and I can't find it. I'm convinced I read Ezra Miller signed up for sequels. because it's a tragic character, and he's been tortured his whole life, and he just wants to find someone to help him and stuff. And that's what he thinks Percival Graves is when actually he's using him. And I thought it was an interesting backstory, but some of the mannerisms of Graves were that of Johnny Depp. I know this is going back to the Grindelwald stuff, but there's one or two moments when you could half sort of sense it, when his hand gestures towards the end, stuff like that. But it was interesting. But what I found fascinating was that ending scene of Eddie Redmayne talking to him. I thought it was a great character moment because Eddie Redmayne isn't a dueler. We literally see him getting forced lightnings, like what happened to Luke on the Death Star.
Yeah, I thought that too.
But when it was happening, I was just there like, oh my day, this is a repeat, isn't it? He just sat there just electrocuting him on the train track. And that was just giving more character of the evil of Grindelwald, the sort of evil, the nice of Redmayne, and this kid trying to make a decision. And ultimately, he tragically dies because they're just powering at him and killing him. Well, we don't know if he's dead because if he is coming back. And I have read there is a deleted scene of him getting on a boat, which they got cut, which is very interesting. But it was interesting because they guided Ezra Miller so much. I knew from the very beginning that, okay, he's going to be of importance. When you read about he's from the family that hate wizards, it's like, okay, he's blatantly a wizard. But I did not expect him to be a Black Cloud. But I want to see a bit more of him because if they have signed Morty films, that's going to be incredible to see how he films that with DC filming. Obviously, it's both Warner Bros., so he's got connections here and there. But it's an interesting character, and I really enjoyed this. Not necessarily the surprise, but I liked the whole punishment, and I thought Ezra Miller was fantastic. You could sense it when he was crying; it was creepy crying, and the whole feeding the soup and looking for the wizard marks and stuff like that. It was a disturbing backstory, which worked, and you can see why he's so twisted and evil.
And you talked about the whole origin of Obscurus. Now, I don't know if you're referring to the origin as in terms of the books, if they're a well-known monster in that book.
I just don't know anything about them. I don't know if they're brand new for this film that's never been mentioned before, or if they have been mentioned somewhere else.
Yeah, because we do get an origin story for them in the movie. I'm trying to remember it now. I think the Obscuruses were created as some kind of deterrent or weapon.
To help the children, and they'd often die young and stuff. They're very dangerous, so the setup's there for it.
And it's like they're invisible and they're really, really difficult to catch and everything like that. So that's why I mean that although it's a black smoke monster, essentially like from Lost, because they circle it through to character, and that it is in essence a fantastic beast. It's a very different kind of beast than what we're used to in the film. We get, like the Niffler, we get the rhino thing. There's all these ones that you associate of being a magical beast, but one that can turn into a human is, for all intents and purposes, a human character that just has this ability to turn into a black smoke. It was kind of a bit different, and I think the concept makes for a good climax, but I just think how it was handled, maybe it wasn't particularly visually interesting. Like I've seen that stuff before. We just mentioned the Niffler. Let's talk about some of the beasts in this. The Niffler is my favorite character in the movie. I love this thing. It's this little hedgehog thing that loves stealing anything shiny. And that's all there is to his character, and he's just getting in loads of trouble. He's breaking into jewelers. One of my favorite shots in the movie is where they're looking for him, and then they walk past the window, and he's just like reaching out for like something, and he's like staying like a statue so they don't notice him. It was fantastic. I loved all the creatures in this. We're going to get to... I want to talk about the CGI later on, but that's more for the nightclub they go to for that scene. I thought they were great. It's some of the best effects I've seen in the Harry Potter films. We get to see a Bowtruckle, which now makes sense when I go back to Deathly Hallows Part 1, where Hagrid says when you were no bigger than a Bowtruckle. Now I know what one is. Kind of reminds me of Baby Groot a little bit as well. I really like that character. I thought there was a lot of personality to him. And then you get the kind of sloth-looking thing with the hair that shows up towards the end. I can't remember what
I called him a cross between E.T. and Einstein.
Yes. There's that character. He was pretty cool. And we saw this in the trailer as well. I'm forgetting all the names of them. It was the monster that grows to fit whatever space it's in. It kind of looked like a bird and a snake mixed together. I thought that was gorgeous. I thought that looked amazing. The only one I thought the special effects were a little bit off on, but I don't know if that was because of the texture of its feathers, was the kind of griffin, phoenix looking thing towards the end.
The Thunderbird.
The Thunderbird, that's it.
Yeah,
it has very
Thunderbirds I go.
shiny. Yeah, it's like very shiny scale-like feathers, but it felt very CGI. But I don't know if that was just because of the natural texture of the creature, but that looked the most CGI out of all of them, I think.
And it looked so much like a hippogriff as well.
It did. Yeah.
I loved the beasts, though. I mean, I loved the Rumpant, which has one of the most weirdest scenes I've ever seen in my life.
We need to talk about it. Go for
it. I sat there at the cinema and it's like, it wants to mate. And what followed, I can't quite explain. I think this is why I turned and liked Eddie Redmayne, because he had the fucking balls to do that on one of the biggest blockbusters. He wanted to like almost lube himself up for this fantastic beast and where to get raped by. He just said we have to get ready. Like I can't explain what I saw.
He's suiting up Jacob with like a helmet and like crash pads. I'm like, oh god, he's gonna make Jacob fuck this rhino.
And it was so bizarre. I mean, I thought I don't know if it was uncomfortable, hilarious, but I turned to my mate and I was there like, Christ, what on earth is going on? Yeah, and I think everyone was just in this state of confusion. And the kids are gonna love the whole sort of dancing, rolling things, and it was a very interesting performance for a minute. I'm just waiting to see the memes, in all honesty, from that scene.
I want to take that scene and I want to put just play that scene with a caption underneath which says like Academy Award winner Eddie Redmayne, and just have that dance play out. He's doing like that weird mating ritual dance to try and, I guess it was to try and calm down the rhino, right? To get it back in the suitcase.
Yeah. And then it got a bit of a thing for Jacob.
You knew where it was going, didn't you? You could tell where the scene was going to go. But I just thought when he was suiting him up, I was like, oh God, Eddie Redmayne, like, is this why you brought Jacob along on this quest, because you want him to fuck a rhino? It was just weird. It was fun though, and I think it was a necessary scene. We talked about how every time the creatures are on there, it feels like a very different movie. And that's why I think tonally it might be a bit inconsistent, because you get scenes like that followed by death and destruction in the political world with like the whole senator and the senator's son. But I do think it was a necessary scene, and it was probably like one of the biggest beast moments in terms of how long it lingered on a single creature, I would say. But yeah, it was a really weird scene, and I'm not quite sure, because I was watching it and I didn't know whether to laugh or just face palm at what I was seeing.
Yeah,
I think maybe that was the intention. I'm not sure.
It was unique.
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely was unique. Let's talk about the cantina scene then that we get in the trailer, which is like the underground wizarding bar thing. I don't know much about it. I can't remember the name of the singer, but there was a singer on YouTube, I believe she was, and Warner Brothers reached out to her and asked her to do a song. They didn't initially say what it was. They sent her the lyrics, and she saw all the magical creatures' names. I think the word hippogriffs in there somewhere. And she was thinking, like, is this to do with Harry Potter? And she got to do the song in this, in the bar scene, which is a fantastic honor to be brought on by Warner Brothers. This, to me, was that world building I wanted to see. I loved this bar. I loved all the creatures. We get to see a giant sitting in there. It is like that moment in the cantina. Now, don't get me wrong. It's nowhere near that scale. There's a lot more creatures in that, and that's more groundbreaking in terms of film history and everything like that. But it was interesting, and that because it's set in New York, I liked that bar. It's playing the jazz music in there. The one problem I had really was the overuse of CGI in that scene. It's not completely blatant, but for example, Ron Perlman's character, he plays a goblin. When you look at the Harry Potter films, they had short actors in makeup, and they looked like real creatures. Now, when you get to this, it's all done. It looked like it was motion capture, because the facial expressions were quite impressive on them. Even the elf singer as well, she looked really cool. But it's going to bring up that visual inconsistency between this series and Harry Potter, which is a shame. They could have got Ron Perlman to do the voice, for example, but the CGI kind of threw me off. And you look at the makeup in the old Harry Potter films, they still completely hold up, like Grip Hook in Deathly Hallows Part 1, Part 2. But I think this one's going to age very rapidly because it was done in CGI. There's some things that need to be done with effects and some things that can be done with makeup. And I think this was an example where they went a bit too overboard with the CGI.
Yeah, and The canteen scene was odd because I loved the whole to get in you've got to have the right costume on and the stuff on the walls. The giant looked really cool. We spoke in our Order of the Phoenix review about the giants, and that you mentioned it should be more like Game of Thrones. I felt very much like it was a Game of Thrones giant in the bar,
Yeah, me too.
which was really cool because maybe we might get a bit more of them over the coming films. But I agree that I really didn't like the Ron Perlman character for not necessarily a protagonist, but someone that has an importance to a scene. It's not lazy that it's CGI, but the goblins are makeup, and where they were I don't know if Ron Perlman did mocap. I doubt he would, but it did look like him in the teeth and the eyes and stuff. But could they not have done that on makeup and had his voice in?
Yeah.
But I loved the whole negotiations aspect with it. It was so generic. It was kind of cool. And then Eddie Redmayne gets had this really unique, fascinating one, which you think is the one he wants, and actually he wants Pickett the Bowtruckle.
That was actually kind of heartbreaking as well to see the Bowtruckle, how it really doesn't want to leave Eddie Redmayne.
And Eddie Redmayne doesn't want to give it up because it's a bad guy, and he's there like, oh, these pick locks, don't they? And he's there like, you're not having it. And then you knew he's going to get him back, but at least some funny lines later on with the Bowtruckle and Eddie Redmayne. But one thing I loved, which was really minor, I love in these films the artwork of the wanted posters, stuff like that. There's this great moment where he's tipped off the Makusa that they're coming, and all the posters instantly change to everyone else's wanted posters. And it's this really cool little minor thing, but just it does do a bit more world building. And I quite liked it. It's just that scene is just the Ron Perlman stuff I didn't like, which was a shame.
And it's more stuff like that I think would have elevated the movie, absolutely. But it almost is like a throwaway scene. But I did like what it was trying to do. Just the CGI did kind of throw me off a bit. We need to talk about the execution electric chair kind of thing. That was like fucking barbaric what they were about to do. I initially thought it was just like a dunking stool that was going to just like an obliviate kind of thing that lifts them out and they've forgotten everything. But no, like this is really, like you see it disintegrates them. I think like the chair drops into it, doesn't it? And it just like burns up or something like that.
I think so. It was really odd because they said kill them, and I was like, well, they're screwed because they've got the spell. Yeah. And they took him to a room and said, oh, they're going to kill him in this white room with wands. And it was actually, it's like getting murdered in your own pensieve. It was almost like it's like a last dinner, you get your last memories. And I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, but I was just shocked that I said to her, and I was like, well, can't they choose Vada Kedavra? Because if they're going to kill them, then they could. But it was so, not like a horror film, but it was just really creepy.
It was unique again, wasn't it? It was something different. It was taking the concept of the pensieve, which we've seen before, but it was doing something new with it.
Yeah, and it was the nurses looked terrifying as well, the way they were acting and stuff. But it was interesting because when I didn't expect it to be like a pensieve, but it was. But I didn't know if she was getting killed because there was that thing swimming around that they changed to melt them in it, or if there was another way they'd kill them. But it was just something I never expected to see in a Harry Potter film. But it makes sense given that back then the electric chair was the punishment. And this is almost the wizarding version of it.
Yeah, and almost like when she's about to go in, it's almost like the T-1000 liquid metal that's trying to swallow her into the pit. Really, really cool stuff. I liked that. More stuff like that. Again, the world building, new stuff that we haven't seen before. So new stuff we've seen before. Let's talk about some stuff we have heard before. So let's talk about all the links that we noticed to Harry Potter. There really wasn't that many, and I congratulate it for that. We talk about the Hobbit films where it can't go 5 minutes without reminding you that Lord of the Rings was a thing or characters. This one did it in a much more believable, better way, felt more organic, more tethered into the world. So there's a bit of a back and forth between Eddie Redmayne being British, talking about how Hogwarts is the best wizarding school, against the American characters, which is saying the American school is, I forget its name now. But you do kind of laugh because you've seen Harry Potter and you're used to Hogwarts. When someone says another wizarding school's better, you're like, fucking Hogwarts. Hogwarts is the best. And then he says it in the film. I did like that. I thought that was a nice bit of banter back and forth between them. Very believable.
Yeah, and it was a cool one because, like Lord of the Rings, especially not Lord of the Rings, sorry, The Last Hobbit, you're going to go on this quest. There is a lone ranger or some shit like that. Play the music over the top. And even when they said Hogwarts, I was expecting the Hedwig's theme, and it didn't appear. It carried on the scene as normal, which I'll give them credit to, because that would have been so obvious to shoehorn that music in. But it was kind of funny because when you do think of schools, you do banter who went to the best secondary school and stuff like that. You know, your school was crap, whereas Hogwarts is obviously, you know, we've seen it for seven films. We don't know anything about your school, so everyone's just going to see it as a joke. But the references, there was one I was stunned by in a good way, which was the Lestrange reveal.
Yeah,
and what I want to say on this, the Lestrange family, obviously everyone's going to think of Bellatrix and Narcissa. Narcissa and Bellatrix are actually blacks who married into the Lestrange family. Well, sorry, Narcissa married into the Malfoys, obviously. And we don't see in the films Bellatrix's husband, Rodolphus, so we don't actually know anything about them. So most people will think this girl's going to tie into Bellatrix, which it won't. The Lestranges are part of the Noble 28, who are like the pure wizard blood families. And we see an image, we get a vague bit of backstory with Eddie Redmayne that, you know, there was this girl he liked, and he has a picture who is Zoe Kravitz, who will be in the future films. And I don't know how it's come online, but apparently he got expelled from Hogwarts because he took the fall for an experiment she did on magical creatures. I don't think that was said in the film, but everyone seems to know about it, so I'm guessing it's been put on Pottermore or something. But I just did not expect the Lestrange name drop. But it was kind of cool because it does link back to what we know. And there are 28 noble, they're called the noble families. There are 28 of them. But it was just a nice little bit of backstory that I didn't think we'd really get for him, and I'm assuming they will be exploring that.
But again, it was organic. It wasn't like that moment in Hobbit Desolation of Smaug where Legolas looks at a picture and goes like, who's this? And he's like, that's my wee lad Gimli, and it's like a wink wink nudge nudge to the audience, like stuff like that. I'd hate it if it had been like that. If they'd have said it like that, I'd have hated it too. This has got the benefit though, because it is taking place 70 years, I believe, isn't it? 70 years before the events of Harry Potter. So, you know, Bellatrix probably, no, she wouldn't be around with it. I know the age thing with wizards is weird in Harry Potter, like they can live to like 120, 150. So I liked that, and that's the kind of linking stuff that I'm looking forward to, like the Zoe Kravitz thing, if she's going to come back. Because you can clearly see in Eddie Redmayne's performance that that history between the two is still very deep set in his mind. He still thinks about it a lot. Maybe he's trying to shut it out, but it's always there. And when we get to the end of this film, and it looks like he's trying to set up a new relationship with Tina, that is still very much a prominent obstacle that he's going to have to get past. And I'm sure they'll touch on that in the sequels. But yeah, it was interesting in the cinema when Lestrange was mentioned. I was looking out at the audience because we were quite close to the back, and you could see all groups of people like turn into each other. And you just know that they were the hardcore Harry Potter fans that were like trying to think how it tied in with Lestrange. That was cool. The only other one I noticed was the whole Dumbledore mentioned that when he was expelled, Dumbledore stuck up for him and didn't want to expel him. I watched a review for this movie earlier, actually, and you could tell like he didn't know anything about where the movie is going to go. He was saying like, talking about tie-ins and saying like, if Dumbledore had been thrown in this movie, it would have sucked because we don't need stuff from Harry Potter in there. And I'm like, well, you know, it's going to get to the stage where Dumbledore is a prominent figure in these movies, albeit a young Dumbledore.
And they're going to be recasting him. I'm assuming it'll be similar to Johnny Depp, given him and Grindelwald are the exact same age. And it'll be interesting to see what they do, because at this point in the films, Dumbledore has had this relationship with Grindelwald. It's when they're young. And I think J.K. Rowling said in interviews that he has got scenes in the next film, not a lot, but it is with Newt Scamander. And I think they'll be very fascinating, because I don't know if he mentions Dumbledore told him to go and make the book, or whether that's in the actual book itself.
That's in the actual book itself. I didn't hear it mentioned in the movie.
But it'll be interesting, because in the history aspect, Dumbledore is just a teacher at this point. He isn't the prime minister, headmaster.
Headmaster.
He doesn't get that role until 1945. So it'll be very interesting to see Dumbledore in these next few films and how much of him we do see. Whether, I hope we get small doses and then you get a big build-up to the final battle, which we will get with Grindelwald. Because if the next one was in Paris, Dumbledore should only have very few scenes, if that, one scene tops, I'd say. Just don't overuse him, because then people will start saying you were shoehorning this, that, and the other. Whereas the way it was so natural in this film, everyone's name drops, it was really well done.
And I don't know when that duel is going to actually take place. I don't know if that's going to be midway through in like movie 3, or if they're going to save it for the actual ending and go out on a big action climax with that in film 5.
I'd assume the fifth film, because it takes place in 1945, they're going to jump 19 years. It's going to make sense to do it across 5 films, then, like 3 and then 2 extra ones.
Yeah.
But I'm intrigued.
And really, the only other thing I want to talk about is sort of the ending or endings, because there are a lot of them where they go to obliviate Kowalski, and they kind of do. I just love how that scene was handled. I talked about that I really wasn't into this movie. I was behind this movie from the bit where he gave the Thunderbird the obliviate formula, I guess, and sent it into the clouds, into the rain. From that point onwards, I thought the film was great. The direction on the scenes were beautiful. The scene where they're walking out of the subway and he has to walk into the rain to wipe his mind, and he doesn't want to, and you don't want him to either. He's witnessed all these great things in the wizarding world. It'd almost be like us if we'd have read the Harry Potter books for the first time or seen the movies, and then we had to walk out and forget about everything we'd seen. Also, he'd had this relationship as well with Queenie, which was, although I said that it was very trite, it was very just sort of cliched, they were nice together, and I did think they had a good dynamic together. And just how they handled it, how she walks out with like a magic umbrella almost, and then kisses him, and then when he wakes up and looks, they've all disappeared. I thought that was really nice how they filmed that. And then it sort of goes on from there, where he's set up his bakery. Eddie Redmayne, initially when he bumps into him and hands him the briefcase, I thought he was going to hand him the briefcase of the magical creatures, and then I thought, well, Eddie Redmayne would never do that, would he? Because he's the one who has to tend to them all. But no, I liked how they sort of rounded it all off, and it is good setup for the next one, and it does get you questioning, especially now we know it's going to be set in Paris. It does make you think about how all these characters are going to meet up and what they're going to do next.
And this is what ties into when I said earlier in the spoiler free that I think it's going to be very standalone. I don't think we're going to come back to New York for a few films first. Mm-hmm. I don't know. They might come back to New York in the second film. But the way it kind of feels like they tied up the Kowalski stuff, I love the fact that the bakery is the actual creatures as food. That was a really nice little touch. Mm-hmm. And that it's not an Inception ending, but it's very ambiguous if he remembers her or not. And I really liked that. And I think that was the last shot of the film as well.
Yeah, it was.
Him half remembering. So, it's just one of the really nice character moments. And I think his character acts absolutely incredible. I would like to go back to America, but I want to see what they're doing elsewhere first, because the majority of Grindelwald is in in Europe. But now he's got to break out of prison.
Yeah,
but it's a neat tie-up and a nice little ambiguous ending for people to see. Did he get his memory back or not?
So I guess now we'll just go for overall recommendation and then round out. Having talked about this now, I really don't know where I stand on this movie. I guess I've got to stick to my original guns, where I came out of this film very underwhelmed. It wasn't a film I was hyped for, so it wasn't like it was this crushing disappointment, which is kind of what I had with Force Awakens, that being almost like a direct remake of the original, and I was really let down by it. This movie I kind of saw, I was like, that really didn't do anything for me. It hasn't really got me massively hyped to see the next one. If it establishes these characters more, then it might be an interesting experiment to go back to this one and see if it's a much stronger movie, because that's kind of what I had with the Star Trek films, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films. Really didn't care for the first one that came out in 2009. I wasn't a Star Trek fan. Watched Into Darkness, loved it, went back to the original, and it was like a completely different movie. So maybe I'll have that with this. As of right now, you've got a couple of great performances in there, mostly with Dan Fogler as Jacob Kowalski. There are some moments in it where it genuinely does capture that magic from the Harry Potter movies with the creatures and the wizarding world itself, and that's really nice. However, this movie, don't expect this to hit the heights of the previous Harry Potter movies, because it doesn't generate as much sense of wonder in it. And there is the whole narrative thread of it was kind of off for me. It did take a while for the movie to sort of pick up the pace and tell me where the film was heading to and what the plot was. So that's it, really. I'd still recommend, if you're a Harry Potter fan, chances are you've probably already seen it. Go and see it on a big screen. It absolutely needs that big screen experience. You've seen IMAX, so I guess you can tell me in a minute if you recommend it more on IMAX. But yeah, maybe for me, benefit a few more viewings to sort of get my opinions together. But as of right now, I'm really not set with it, and I was just a little bit bored by it, really.
I'm one that would recommend it. I think it's worth watching to see what they've done. Like Chris, if you're a Harry Potter fan, you've probably seen it by now. If you're intrigued, then maybe that's for you, because we don't know what's going to happen, and no one else does until you see it. And the reactions have been different from different. I've heard different things from different people. So there's
really polarizing.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. But about the Harry Potter stuff, it is so different. Don't go in thinking it's Harry Potter 2.0. I knew that before. I think most people do, but there will be lots of people that do think it is going to be that, where it's really not. But you've just got to see it for yourself, I think. There's some films where you can just say you have to see it. And I think you do, not necessarily with this, but it's a film you have to see to give your own opinion, because it is so different to what you've seen before. And I don't think it is what you're entirely expecting.
Yeah, I mean, when I came out of this movie, I posted something to my Facebook, which was very, very scathing towards this movie. But I mean, since then, that was straight out of the cinema. But now my opinion just kind of sat leveled. And I will see this movie again at some point. Whether I'll see it in the cinema again, I'm not sure. I might wait for DVD, but I will see this movie again, and maybe my opinion will have changed. But yeah, I think I've said pretty much everything on Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. If you have, George, we'll round off on this one.
Yeah, I've very much enjoyed this film. Go see it. If you're on a Harry Potter hype, then chances are you're going to automatically like it more than some people might. Just given that the opening credits drops and there's the Harry Potter theme, that's more than enough to get people excited. But
that's a good point, actually. I did want to bring that up. Do you think there will be some people out there that do give it a free pass anyway because it's tied into the Harry Potter world, if they're a fan of the franchise?
I don't know. I'm sure there are going to be some people that do, but then there's going to be a lot of other people that are so into Harry Potter that they don't like anything that's not Harry Potter, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get that, yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure there will be people giving it a free pass, but it's one of those where it's polarizing because it's so different to what we've seen before. So I don't think anyone can genuinely know what they're going to expect until they see it, especially because it's not a book. Because it's not.
Yeah, and that's where the benefit of this series really is going to go in, that it's almost an original story. It is an original story, but based on the concept that already exists. So that's where it's going to be interesting moving into the sequels. But I guess any news that comes out in the upcoming years, we can talk about, for the sequels that come out, because it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But yeah, that'll do it for our review on Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this film, the Harry Potter films, anything to do with that, please let us know. We are still very much in Harry Potter month. Don't let us fool you because we've done this review. We're not going to talk about Harry Potter. We still need to do reviews on Half-Blood Prince and the last two Deathly Hallows movies. There are 2 weeks left of this month, so we'll have those out within the upcoming weeks. There'll be a top 10 list of Harry Potter moments, and there will be a special Battle of the Brackets themed episode all around the characters of Harry Potter, which we will either do towards the end of this month, or it will be like the first couple of days of December, if not. Moving into December will be Star Wars month. There'll be plenty more reaction videos from me along the way. I've got to edit 2 tonight, and as well as movie reviews not related to Harry Potter with all the other movies that are coming out in the next couple of months. So please do hit that subscribe button. It is the best way to keep updated with all of our content. And yeah, that'll do it from us. Until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.